The phrase underrated game, or more specifically underrated platformer, is something I've seen thrown around a lot over the past couple of years. It felt like at a point every John, Ant and Rob would be making videos discussing games that they felt deserved such a label, and typically this was attributed to a certain game starring a certain spongy boy battling for a certain bikini bottom. There's nothing wrong with wanting to discuss games which you yourself are fond of, which others rarely ever seem to acknowledge. I mean, like, oh wait, what do you reckon this video is? And I'm not trying to have a go at Battle for Bikini Bottom specifically. It is, after all, a very solid 3D platformer. But for quite a while it felt like the game was considered to be this amazing licensed game that nobody knew about, which, in actuality, everyone already knew about. Despite the game being this big open secret, recently it got the full HD remaster treatment from our friends at THQ Nordic and Purple Lamp Studios. So I think it's safe to say that Battle for Bikini Bottom is no longer an underappreciated platformer, but rather an appreciated platformer. But what's this? There's now a hidden gem-shaped hole in the hearts and minds of every single gamer in existence. And by God, today, I'm gonna try and fill it. With what, you may ask? Why, my dear gamer? Only a game based around England's greatest pop culture export. Wallace and Gromit are the stars of a series of claymation films starring the elderly Yorkshireman inventor and his beloved canine companion. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Wallace and Gromit, I'm really annoyed with you. These northern boys and British icons are the brainchildren of Nick Park and animation studio Aardman, who also made Chicken Run, Flushed Away and Creature Comforts, among other things. They made their debut in 1989 with their first short film, A Grand Day Out, and the rest is history. They've gone on to make more shorts, a full-length feature film, and even have a full 45-minute long orchestral performance dedicated to them, as well as being the stars of the new DFS advert. I've been watching the duo for as long as I can remember. I'm fairly sure Wallace sparked my own fascination with cheese at a very early age, and as such I'm very well versed in all things Wallace and Gromit. Here is my objectively correct tier list of all of the films. Yes, Loaf and Death does deserve to be up there. No, A Close Shave does not hold up as well as you think. Me ranking films like A Grand Day Out and A Close Shave as being lower on that list though is by no means an indication that they're bad. In fact, I dare say that there isn't a bad Wallace and Gromit film. However, the constant high quality of the shorts in terms of both writing and animation does have a cost, as in between each of the shorts there's always a hefty gap. After their debut in 1989, Aardman took 4 years to develop the duo's next adventure, The Wrong Trousers, which is their best outing. From there, it only took them 2 years to develop A Close Shave, and it really shows, but then they spent the next decade developing Curse of the Were-Rabbit, a full-length feature film. Finally, after a 3-year gap, Aardman produced what is currently the last of the short films, A Matter of Loaf and Death. The reason for this is reportedly due to the original voice actor for Wallace, Peter Salas's, declining health following the release of Loaf and Death, and sadly he passed away in 2017. However, while Loaf and Death may have seemed like the end of the duo's adventures, in 2019, creator Nick Park announced that the production of the next of their capers had finally begun. This means that the wait between Loaf and Death and this new short, whenever it's released, will be even longer than the wait between A Close Shave and Curse of the Were-Rabbit. However, while that wait was extensive, there was one other piece of Wallace and Gromit content released between those two films, something I've heard very few people ever talk about.
Wallace and Gromit in Project Zoo.
Wallace and Gromit in Project Zoo is a 2003 3D platformer starring the titular claymation film stars. It was developed by Cambridge-based studio Frontier Developments, who are also responsible for the Lost Wind games, Roller Coaster Tycoon, Zoo Tycoon and Connectimals. Taking place after the events of The Wrong Trousers, the game looks to create an interactive experience that shares all the style and charm of the films 6 years before Telltale had their own crack at it with a series of point-and-click games.
Now then, which holes shall we tackle first?
Project Zoo, like the shorts themselves, is something I was introduced to at a very young age and can always remember just sort of having. My earliest memory of the game is getting up with my dad one morning at like 6:30 and playing a tiny bit of the final level with him before he had to go to work and I had to watch an episode of AOSTH. That's Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog for the sex havers among you. Back then I didn't really care if the game was quality or not. I was just happy to be fumbling my way through what I thought was a fun game starring the funny cheese man and his useful dog. As I got older though and revisited the game, I started to grow an appreciation for the game as a whole, not just because of its source material. I came to appreciate the design, the sound, the feel of the game, and it's something which I now feel is a genuinely very underappreciated piece of the series and an overlooked member of a genre which is filled with hidden gems. Today is the day though, the day that I show the world what a lovely little game this is, and finally, people will see why they've wasted 17 years of their lives not playing
Wallace and Gromit in Project Zoo.
The story of Project Zoo is as simplistic as one could hope for. Each of the shorts involve Wallace and Gromit being in a different profession or relatively mundane situation, but approaching it in an extravagant and exaggerated way. The classic example of this is A Grand Day Out. Wallace runs out of cheese and it's a bank holiday, so no shops are open. So Wallace's logical thought process isn't to wait till the next day to buy cheese, but instead to build a rocket from scratch and go to the moon to get cheese because, of course,
Everybody knows the moon's made of cheese.
and there's no bank holidays on the moon, so it isn't closed. Project Zoo starts off in a similar way. Over breakfast, Wallace remembers it's the birthday of the pair's adopted polar bear, Archie, who lives in West Wallaby Street Zoo. However, upon trying to enter the zoo to visit Archie, the two discover it's closed, and when Wallace tries to contact the authorities because it's past opening time, they discover that their former lodger and diamond thief, Feathers McGraw, who gets his name in this game, has taken over the zoo from within following his incarceration at the end of the wrong trousers. Naturally, Wallace and Gromit build a Trojan penguin to infiltrate the zoo and rescue Archie, who Feathers has captured and is using to lure them into traps set throughout the zoo. The pair set off to chase down Feathers and rescue Archie, all the while freeing baby animals from cages throughout the zoo, which Feathers has trapped them in order to blackmail their parents into doing his bidding. Along the way, our heroes discover that the reason Feathers has enslaved the different animals is so they can work as part of his diamond manufacturing operation. But through freeing the animals and taking down Feathers' giant penguin robot, yeah, he has one of those, Wallace and Gromit shut down the Diamond-O-Matic and land Feathers back in jail. Well, it's their penguin habitat in the zoo, but, 6 and 2/3. This story is classic Wallace and Gromit. It takes the ordinary concept of visiting the zoo and turns it into an adventure for our heroes. I like how we slowly discover Feathers' plan as we progress throughout the game, and how everything within the game makes sense within this universe. For instance, while I played off Feathers' giant robot as a joke, it would maybe make sense for him to have one. After all, he was smart enough to completely modify the techno trousers overnight to fit his own needs, and is a known criminal capable of orchestrating complex heists all on his own. Of course, he would also be smart enough to build a giant robot in his own likeness, and transform a zoo into a secret diamond manufacturing operation. Am I taking a game that stars this man
I think I've bent me tube.
too seriously? Probably. But I just love how much the game tries to make itself fit within the universe of Wallace and Gromit, and as a result, the story feels like a perfect fit for the series. I'm assuming this is due to Aardman themselves having direct involvement with the game, but having them on board means that we have a story here which can be seamlessly integrated with the rest of the series. Games, unlike short films however, can't just get along with story alone. So how does the game actually play? Project Zoo, like I said earlier, is a 3D platformer. You control Gromit as you traverse through areas based around different parts of a zoo, and while this may sound restrictive in terms of level themes, the game does a good job of diversifying them. You've got a jungle habitat, abandoned mine shafts below the zoo, the lava area, where I'm assuming the gift shop is, warehouses which presumably store food and supplies for the animals, the polar bear enclosure, and finally the Diamond-O-Matic. With the exception of the final level, which is designed as a linear gauntlet which tests all of your skills, most of the locations have a good mix of fairly open-ended design mixed in with some more straightforward areas. Think Banjo-Kazooie with fewer but more complicated objectives to complete, mixed in with some overtly linear sections. I honestly love how these levels are designed, and the mix of the two different styles of level design keeps things feeling fresh. I'm admittedly more a fan of the more open areas, but it's all pretty solid stuff. I also just want to quickly say I love how the character and levels look. It looks and feels so true to the actual shorts, and each environment is varied in terms of design, colour palette and lighting, so that no two areas feel the same. Each area also ends with a unique boss fight or encounter with a machine Feathers has built. Each of these encounters take a different form, whether it be a straight up boss fight as Gromit himself, or playing as the duo together piloting a vehicle as part of the encounter. They're all unique, don't overstay their welcome, and generally speaking, are fun. The final boss does get a little bit long in the tooth by the end, and it's a little bit tricky to hit him sometimes, but as the final encounter you'd expect it to be a bit more difficult and longer than the rest of the encounters, so it's overall not too big an issue. Also, while I said there are fewer objectives to complete, I'm strictly speaking about mandatory ones, as there's a couple of collectibles within each level you can go after. The first are the tools, which you'll need to find alongside rescuing animals so that Wallace can fix and build certain devices to help you progress. There's only 10 per level, and most of them you find along your way to certain objectives, so you should never be stuck for them so long as you're looking for them. Nuts and bolts, the game's currency, are also needed for this reason. The second and only other collectibles are these golden coins. These are completely optional. You find them by doing different mini challenges, completing secret mini levels, and just straight up finding them. There's 30 of these per level, and they're often off the beaten path, but if you do want to go after them, you can unlock a mini documentary on the making of the game, some clips from The Wrong Trousers, and an episode of the eventual TV show Cracking Contraptions. It's only about 2 minutes long, but it's such a neat little bonus and rewards the player for collecting all the coins. I've personally never done it myself and tend to just stick to finding all the tools, but I like the idea of the coins a lot as they add a good amount of optional content for those who just want to sink their teeth into these levels. I like the way these levels are designed generally too, as there's plenty of room for exploration while completing the objectives, but it's never too hard to find where you're supposed to go. It's Gromit who we control while traversing these open environments. Gromit's got all the flips, tricks and double dippers you'd want in your mid-2000s platforming character. Gromit can jump, high jump, roll, long jump, backflip jump, and if you roll into a wall... well, I've never seen Mayro do that before. Gromit's got a good amount of heft to him, so platforming is rarely ever an issue because of how he feels to control, combined with his arsenal of movement options and jumps he has at his disposal, each of which serve a different purpose of either gaining horizontal or vertical momentum. The cool thing about this is the base jump is quite short, but this not only means that you get quite a lot of utility out of his full moveset as a result, but it also helps you feel like you're controlling your average Joe, not some platforming god like Homer. Gromit's also got a ledge hang which on the one hand can make platforming a little bit more forgiving, and on the other hand can be the cause of some unfair deaths. This is the only move in the game though that feels anything less than responsive, and while instances where it did kill me are few and far between, it's still something to watch out for. Gromit's owner though isn't so mobile, and as such you'll have to whistle for Wallace to move him along to certain places when you find a path for him or can't progress yourself. Ironically, it's sort of like taking your dog for a walk. Despite how this may sound, it's actually fairly non-intrusive, as most of the time Wallace may have already made his way to where he needs to be, and if not, you get treated to seeing him hurtle at top speed towards his destination. The duo needing to help each other in order to progress feels really nice and keeps in line with the classic dynamic of Gromit doing all the heavy lifting with Wallace handling the more mechanical side of things. Guiding Wallace around is also the basis of two of my favourite levels in the game, the mines and the polar bear enclosure. I know I may have made this mechanic sound like an escort mission, but honestly it's really not the case. Hopping and bopping with your vest clad friend ain't all you're going to be doing though, because this game also has its fair share of combat mixed in with the platforming. Gromit knows how to handle himself though. He's got a basic 3-hit combo, the second 2 hits of which use the same sound effect as Sonic's jump from 06 onward, and he also has a ground pound. There's enough enemy variety to keep things fresh for a decent length of time, but as we go on there are certain sections where you're just sort of locked in a room and have to kill all the baddies, which is kinda lame. There's also a tiny bit of knockback when you get hit, but it's just this tiny hop so it's nothing major too intrusive, just something worth mentioning. Overall though, the combat itself is fine, nothing special, just something to break up the platforming and light puzzle solving you'll be doing with all the different weapons and tools Gromit gets access to. You'll unlock each of these as you progress through the game. Mostly the weapons and tools Gromit gets are used for puzzle solving, but a couple of them have their uses in combat, specifically the turnip launcher, which 1 or 2 shots enemies, and the porridge machine gun, which is a great way to take down flying enemies. You unlock some of these by just finding them, like the fire extinguisher and the torch, but others Wallace has to build for you. In some levels Wallace will find something he thinks he can tinker with, and via the collecting enough nuts and bolts or finding enough tools, he'll fashion something new for you to use. These include the telescopic banana gun and the previously mentioned porridge machine gun and turnip launcher. The banana gun is pretty basic, a pistol standing if you will. You can aim it to hit targets and that's pretty much it. The porridge machine gun is a straight upgrade from this. It's got much better range, fires much faster, has more ammo, can knock enemies who are in the air down in one hit, and can jam cogs and move mechanisms for puzzle solving. The turnip launcher is also mainly used for combat, but it can blast open doors. The porridge machine gun is definitely the most useful, and that's probably why it's featured on the European box art. The US got the banana gun for some reason? I don't know man, I think the porridge machine gun is more iconic honestly, as it's the best looking and most useful weapon in the game. Oh, and they also have the weapon wheel here from Ratchet & Clank. That's pretty neat. There's also a couple of vehicle sections in the game and they all control solidly enough. They're all simple to control and easy to understand, so again they provide a nice amount of variety without overstaying their welcome. Aside from all of that, there's also one instance of stealth in the game, but it's over with pretty quickly, only being a small portion of the 4th level, so it's not too much of an issue, despite how weirdly oblivious or hyper alert the guard you're sneaking past can be. Like I said before, the gameplay isn't anything groundbreaking, but it's all well designed, meaning that there's very few instances of jank or areas that are just flat out unfun to play. It has some nice variety in regards to both how levels are designed and the gameplay generally, meaning that you're never doing anything that feels samey or repetitive. All of this, alongside how satisfying Gromit feels to control and the intuitive collectible placement, makes for a very solid platforming experience starring Yorkshire's finest. While we're on the topic of things that this game does well, let's quickly talk about the game's soundtrack. Project Zoo's music, as with the game as a whole, fits the style that the shorts usually run with. The pieces themselves are mostly atmospheric and quite calm, to keep the vibe nice and chill while you're platforming, but but the soundtrack is actually dynamic. Each level has 3 pieces of music assigned to it, one for standing still, one for when you're moving, and one for when you're fighting enemies. These are all variations on the same piece, but I really appreciate how seamlessly the soundtrack can go from being a little more tense when you're engaging robots to calm again when you're just back to traversing an area. I could see these being pretty good pieces to work to, honestly. They're nothing amazing, but they fit the environments well and are a good accompaniment to whatever you're doing within a level at a given time. The ones I always remember are the mines, the jungle house, and the ice house. Admittedly, I don't have a terrible amount to say about the game's music, but it's all good stuff. Project Zoo isn't the best game ever made. It's not something revolutionary or incredibly innovative. It's probably not going to make it into your top 10 favourite games ever if you play it after watching this video, and it's definitely not some golden standard to which all platformers in the industry as a whole should be held to. But you know what it is? It's a game with a lot of heart. It's a game with a ton of personality. It's a game which sets out to try and translate beloved characters from one medium to another, and I think it completely nails that. This game oozes the same charm the shorts do and manages, I think, to find its place among some of the better games this genre has to offer. My goal today wasn't to show off this magnificent platforming experience that changed my life or whatever. It was to show you all the charming, well-designed and, above all, fun game that I've been lucky enough to experience since I was little, and which I feel gets so sorely overlooked in a genre which is filled with games that many others would also consider to be underappreciated. But among all the Scalers, Ties, and Blinkses, if I was to recommend you one platformer to try from this era of games, I would, and probably always will, recommend Wallace and Gromit in Project Zoo.